Millionaire woman asks a poor farmer for help after her car breaks down. When she steps into his barn, he is froze and falls madly in love with her. The wind howled like a wounded beast, dragging sheets of snow across the desolate country road. Amelia Reynolds tightened her grip on the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield. Her luxury sedan groaned as it skidded slightly on the icy surface before sputtering. Then down the dashboard flickered. Silence. No, not now, she muttered, tapping the wheel in frustration. Her phone had no signal. The storm was worsening by the second. She opened the car door and was met with a blast of wind, so cold it stole her breath. Pulling her coat tight around her, Amelia stepped out into the blizzard. Her black boots sank deep into the snow. She had been driving to a fundraising summit 3 hours outside the city, but her GPS had rerouted her through this rural back road. Now she was lost, alone, freezing. A faint glow caught her eye across the field. A house, maybe a barn. She could not tell. It was her only hope. Stumbling forward, snow clinging to her lashes and soaking through her coat, she made her way toward the light. By the time she reached the front porch of the farmhouse, her hands were stiff, her lips numb. She pounded on the door, hoping, praying. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man in a flannel shirt and jeans. His face was weathered, but striking with a jawline that hadn't softened from years of manual labor. He didn't smile. I'm sorry, Amelia stammered, her voice barely audible through chattering teeth. My car broke down. I'm lost. I need somewhere warm to stay. The man blinked slowly, his blue eyes cautious. I don't usually get visitors, especially not during a blizzard. Please, she whispered, shivering. If you don't help me, I will freeze to death. There was a long pause before he opened the door wider. Get in. Amelia stepped inside, her body instantly grateful for the warmth. The Bada-Bai. Farmhouse was simple. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a worn leather armchair, but it radiated comfort. She inhaled the scent of pine and smoke. Take off that coat, he said. You're soaked. She hesitated, but did as instructed, revealing a silk blouse, now damp and clinging to her skin. He handed her a thick wool blanket from the couch and gestured toward the fire. Sit, warm up. Amelia collapsed into the chair, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. Her eyes met his, as he knelt to toss another log into the flames. I'm Amelia, she said, her voice trembling. Thomas, he replied curtly. Thank you, Thomas. I didn't know where else to go. He studied her for a beat. What were you doing out here? I was driving to a charity conference, she explained, in Pine Hollow. My GPS took me this way. I didn't think. It's not safe during storms like this. These roads shut down fast. I figured that out too late, she said, with a small, helpless laugh. Thomas returned with a mug of something, hot, tea or cider, she wasn't sure. She took it gratefully, cupping it between her hands. You live here alone? She asked, glancing around. Yeah, she nodded. It's quiet. That's how I like it. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. I didn't mean to barge in, she said, her voice softening. I just didn't want to die in a snowbank. His eyes flicked to hers. For the first time, there was a glimmer of something else. Not suspicion, not caution, something warmer. No one should be left out there alone, he said. She exhaled slowly, letting herself relax just a little. Later, Thomas brought her dry clothes, an old sweatshirt, and flannel pants. Too big, but warm. She changed in the bathroom, her designer clothes abandoned in a heap. When she returned, he had prepared a modest meal, soup, and toasted bread. She ate in silence, grateful. "I'll set up the guest room," he said. "You'll be safe here tonight." Amelia looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. There was something in his posture, something guarded, heavy, like a man who had carried too much for too long. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time. He nodded and left the room. Alone now, Amelia sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Everything felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had been a powerful CEO heading to another event, another polished speech. Now she was a stranded stranger wrapped in a stranger's blanket, sitting in the quiet heart of nowhere, and yet she felt oddly at peace. In the hallway, Thomas paused, watching her silhouette from a distance. She looked completely out of place, too refined, too polished for this world of wood and ash, but somehow it suited her. Or maybe it was the stillness in her eyes that mirrored his own. Outside, the snowstorm raged on. Inside, two worlds, wealth and solitude, ambition and stillness, collided quietly without fanfare, and something had begun. Neither of them knew it yet, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that would soon stir inside their hearts. The next morning, the wind had eased, but the world remained blanketed in snow. Thick drifts pressed against the windows, and icicles hung from the roof like glass daggers. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the cold. Thomas stirred a pot of water over the wood-burning stove in the barn, his movements steady, and cracked the main house, he had explained, was under partial renovation. Roofing issues that had left the upstairs rooms unusable for the season. The barn, however, was warm, insulated, and clean. Its loft transformed into a livable space for emergencies, though it rarely saw use. Amelia stood stiffly near the open stall door, watching the steam rise. She wore the oversized clothes he had given her, flannel and fleece, a far cry from the designer winter coat and heels she had arrived in. Her sleek bun had loosened, leaving soft waves framing her face. Thomas handed her a mug without a word. She took it, cautious, but grateful. "Thank you," she said after a pause. He gave a brief nod and turned to toss more hay into the horses' stalls. "Storm's letting up. Roads might be clear by tomorrow, so I can leave," she said quietly, not sure if it was a statement or a question. Thomas looked over his shoulder. "If you want to." Silence hung for a while, broken only by the snorting of horses and the rustling of straw. Amelia sipped the tea. It was strong, earthy, nothing like the imported blends she favored, and yet it was strangely comforting. "I've never slept in a barn before," she said, trying to break the tension. "I figured," she glanced around. "It's cozy in a rustic way." Thomas smirked faintly, but didn't comment. They stood there, two people, from different universes, bound together by snow and circumstance. The heat from the small stove spread slowly, wrapping the room in a hush that made Amelia oddly restless. She crossed her arms. "Do you live out here all alone?" "Yeah, no wife, family?" "Nope." She hesitated. "That's a choice." Thomas leaned against the stall door, arms crossed now. "Some people choose to build up, some choose to disappear. I guess I did both." Amelia tilted her head. "That's cryptic." He shrugged. "You're not the only one with a story." That stung a little. "Excuse me?" Thomas met her gaze, calm, but direct. "You walked in here last night like you owned the world. And maybe you do, but out here it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive or what boardroom you command." She straightened. "You think I'm just some spoiled heiress who got lost?" "I think," he said carefully. You're not used to anyone not needing something from you." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. He went back to tending the horses. Later that afternoon, while Thomas worked outside, clearing snow from the barn path, Amelia wandered through the quiet stalls, tracing her fingers along the wooden beams. The scent of hay and saddle oil clung to the air. She paused by a brown mare and leaned over the gate to stroke her nose. Through the half-closed stable door, she caught the sound of Thomas's voice, soft, low, speaking to the animals. "She won't stay," he said, brushing down the horse. "Women like that. They always leave when the sun comes out. We don't exist in their world." Amelia froze. "She's beautiful." "Yeah," he continued, "but that world, it's nothing like ours. She'll forget this place before the ice melts." Something twisted in Amelia's chest. She turned away, retreating quietly to the loft. That night she couldn't sleep. The barn was warm, the blankets thick, but her mind spun with what she had overheard. She didn't know why it bothered her so much. Maybe because she didn't want to be the woman who left and forgot. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her and seen through the polish, the power, and into something raw beneath. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not before she knew what else was hiding, in the quiet gaze of a man who had nothing to offer but shelter and sincerity. The wind howled again that night, rattling the barn doors like an unwelcome guest. Snow lashed against the wooden walls as if winter was determined to reclaim the warmth Thomas had managed to trap inside. Amelia stirred in her sleep, curled beneath layers of thick blankets in the makeshift loft. Her face glistened with sweat despite the chill in the air, and her breathing had grown uneven, shallow. Thomas had been in the barn checking on the horses one last time before turning in when he heard the coughing, sharp, dry, persistent. He climbed the loft ladder in 3 quick steps. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "You okay?" Amelia jolted awake, her eyes glassy with fever. Just a cold," she whispered, but her body trembled under the covers. Thomas didn't argue. He stood and disappeared down the ladder. Minutes later, he returned with a steaming mug and a folded cloth. "Drink this," he said, gently helping her sit up. "What is it?" she rasped. "Elderberry and honey? Works better than half the stuff you'll find at a pharmacy." She took a cautious sip. The warmth soothed her throat almost instantly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. He nodded, then dabbed the cloth against her forehead. "Your fever's not too bad yet, but you need to rest." She blinked at him, surprised at his gentleness. "You always take care of strangers like this." He shrugged. "Only the ones who might freeze to death in my barn." A faint smile touched her lips. "You're kinder than you let on." Thomas looked away. Don't read too much into it. But something about the way her voice trembled, the way she held the mug with both hands, as if anchoring herself to it, something made him linger. "I used to get sick a lot," she said suddenly. He looked up. "Yeah." She nodded, eyes distant now. "When I was a kid, foster homes, group shelters, some were fine, some were not." Thomas stayed silent, letting her speak. "I remember. One winter," she continued, voice thin, "I had strep throat and no one believed me, thought I was faking it to skip school. I lay in a storage closet for 2 days before a teacher found me, his hands clenched around the edge of the stool, jaw tight. It's fine," she cut in quickly, though her voice wavered. "It's just sometimes the body remembers what the mind tries to forget." He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to people sharing this way, so open, so raw. "I don't usually tell people that," she added, glancing at him. He met her gaze. Why me? She hesitated. Because you didn't ask. That silenced him. Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, the air was filled with something quieter. He reached over and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, more gently than he meant to. You should rest. She nodded and laid back down, her breathing still uneven, but steadier now. Thomas remained there for a while, sitting beside her, listening to the rise and fall of her breath. He wasn't sure. When it happened, maybe it was the way the firelight danced across her face, softening the edges of someone who had built walls so high even she forgot they were there. Or maybe it was the way her lips curved slightly in sleep, the way she looked safe. He reached out almost without thinking and gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His hand froze in midair. What was he doing? This woman was a stranger, a CEO, a force of nature from a world he had long sworn off, and yet his fingers lightly grazed her hair just once before he pulled away, heart pounding. He looked down at her and felt something he hadn't felt in years, something terrifying, something warm, something real. She stirred slightly but did not wake. He stood quietly, tucked the blanket tighter around her, and climbed down the ladder. Back among the horses, Thomas stood in silence for a long time. He had let himself feel nothing for so long. Now he wasn't sure if that silence would ever return. The storm outside had not eased. Snow slapped against the barn walls with relentless force, each gust of wind a scream through the rafters. The horses shifted in their stalls, restless and uneasy. In the loft, Thomas stirred from half-leap as a harsh, rattling cough echoed through the silence. He was up the ladder in seconds. Amelia sat upright, shaking beneath the thick quilt, one hand pressed against her chest as another cough ripped through her. Her face was flushed, eyes watery. She looked like a woman fighting her own breath. "Hey," Thomas said softly. "You're burning up." "I'll be fine," she managed hilariously, voice dry and cracking. "No, you won't." He climbed the last step, crouching beside her with a worn thermos and a folded cloth. "You don't have to." "Don't talk," he interrupted, placing the thermos in her hands. "Drink." The liquid was hot and herbal, not pleasant but soothing. Amelia sipped obediently, too tired to argue. "What is this?" she rasped. "Pine needle tea? Bit of mint? Helps bring the fever down," she grimaced. "Tastes like a forest." Thomas gave a dry chuckle. "That's because it is." He soaked the cloth in cool water from a basin and pressed it gently to her forehead. She flinched at first, but his touch was careful, hesitant, almost reverent. Amelia leaned back, eyes fluttering shut. "Thank you for this. You're sick. Not like I could ignore it." They sat in quiet for a moment. The wind outside howled, but inside the barn there was a cocoon of warmth of something unspoken. "You ever get sick like this?" she asked suddenly, eyes still closed. Thomas looked down at his hands. "Once or twice. When I was younger." She turned her head slowly toward him. "Were you alone?" A pause. "Yeah," he admitted. "A lot of the time?" Amelia nodded faintly. "I was too." He glanced at her. She opened her eyes, the fever making them glassy, but her gaze was sharp with something else. Vulnerability. "I've never told anyone this," she began, voice low. "I was in the foster system from the time I was 5. Bounced around from one place to another like I was a package nobody wanted." Thomas didn't speak. He just listened. "I got used to sleeping with shoes on just in case we were moved in the middle of the night. I learned to hide food under my pillow because some places rationed it like punishment in school. That was just a break between survival." The words came slowly but without hesitation now, like she'd dammed them up for years. There was a woman once, Miss Carla. She let me read at the library after school. She never asked questions. She just let me be. I think she saved my life in small ways. Thomas swallowed hard, throat thick. Sounds like someone who saw you. She did, Amelia said quietly. The first person who didn't look at me like I was trouble. There was a long silence between them. A silence heavy, not with distance, but with understanding. You don't seem like someone who'd let that kind of past define her, Thomas said, eventually. Amelia smiled weakly. I didn't have the luxury. If I let it define me, I wouldn't have survived. You've done more than survive. Her eyes shimmered, and yet here I am, shivering in a barn, drinking forest water. Thomas chuckled again, softer this time. She coughed once more, wincing. Guess I'm still human after all. You always were. His voice was so quiet she almost missed it. She blinked at him, surprised. Thomas stood up, reaching for the quilt to adjust it over her shoulders. Try to sleep. She nodded and closed her eyes. He watched her for a moment longer, then turned to leave, but stopped. His hand hovered above her forehead, then her hair. A gentle lock had fallen across her temple. Without thinking, he reached out and brushed it back. Just that. But something inside him shifted. He looked down at her sleeping form, the tension in her brow softening, the corners of her mouth relaxed. There was something so painfully strong and fragile about her, so familiar in ways he hadn't expected, like two different wounds had recognized each other and started to heal. He had never believed in fate, but now he wasn't so sure. He stepped down the ladder quietly, heart unsteady, his own thoughts louder than the storm. Upstairs, Amelia slept on, but in the space between their worlds, something unspoken had begun, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The morning broke clear for the first time in days. Sunlight filtered through the barn windows, catching soft rays on the dust and hay. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine, frozen world outside. Amelia stood near the front of the barn, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her jaw clenched, her voice tense. Yes, I know the board is waiting, she said. Tell them I will land before noon. Just hold them off a little longer. I am on my way. She ended the call, her breath misting in the cold air. Her heels, now scuffed and damp, crunched slightly on the wooden floor as she turned toward Thomas, who stood a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. I have to go, she said. I figured, he replied, voice flat. They need me back in the city. I have a meeting that could decide everything I have built. Thomas nodded once. Of course, people like you have places to be. Amelia flinched, not from the words, but the way he said them, like he was trying not to care. Thomas, she started, taking a step closer. These past days I did not expect. You should not stay, he interrupted, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond her shoulder. This place, it is not meant for someone like you. She searched his face. What if I wanted to stay? He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Then you would lose everything. Your board, your reputation, your world. And for what? A few quiet mornings in a barn. Amelia's heart twisted. You do not understand, she whispered. If I stay, I will lose everything. Thomas finally looked at her. There was something raw and wounded in his eyes. No, I understand perfectly. That is why you need to go. Outside, the engine of the repaired vehicle idled, waiting. Amelia stood in silence for a moment, then nodded. She turned to leave, walking slowly toward the barn door, but just as she reached it, She paused. She turned around, her eyes shining with something she could not hold back. In 2 quick steps, she crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him. "I do not know why this hurts," she murmured into his shoulder. "But it does." Thomas hesitated for a moment and then wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was tight, fierce, wordless. Then she pulled back just enough to look at him, and in that look, something unspoken passed between them, something neither had the courage to say aloud. Amelia leaned in, and they kissed. It was not passionate, not wild. It was slow, quiet, and full of things unsaid. It was a goodbye wrapped in hope, a promise never made, a future never asked for. When they parted, she lingered for a moment, her forehead resting against his. "Take care of the horses," she whispered. Thomas gave a soft smile always, and then she was gone. The barn door creaked open and slammed shut behind her. The cold rushed in for a second, then faded as the silence returned. Thomas stood still, hands clenched at his sides. He did not move until he heard the sound of the car driving away. Tires crunching on snow, fading into the distance. When he finally sat down, it was in the same spot she had rested 2 nights before. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall, exhaling slowly. The barn had never felt so empty, but it was not just the cold he felt anymore. It was absence. It was love recognized too late. And it was the quiet ache of a man who had just lost something he never even knew he needed. The city's rhythm returned to Amelia like an old, unwelcome song. The moment her private car pulled up to the mirrored skyscraper, assistants surrounded her, updating schedules, delivering crisis memos, handing her coffee that no longer tasted like anything. Her heels echoed on the marble floor as she entered the conference room. The board was already seated. Cold faces, calculated smiles. "We are glad you could rejoin us," one of the older partners said, his tone clipped. Another executive glanced at his tablet. "Media flagged your absence at the charity summit. Investors have been calling since dawn." Amelia sat, setting her hands on the table. She opened her laptop, but her fingers trembled slightly. One board member spoke up, voice sharp. "There are rumors that you vanished to the countryside during one of our most high-profile weeks." Amelia's lips tightened. "There was a snowstorm. I was stranded. But you were unreachable." Another cut in. "In this company, perception is currency. You, of all people, know that." She stared at the glowing screen in front of her. None of this felt real. None of it felt right. When the meeting ended, she returned to her office, glass walls shielding her from the city skyline beyond. The city stretched endlessly, glittering, like ambition itself. But it no longer dazzled her. She sank into the leather chair, removed her earrings, then opened the side drawer for a breath mint. That was when her fingers brushed something soft, a folded square of flannel. She pulled it out slowly. Thomas's handkerchief, the one he had wrapped around her wrist when she was coughing that night in the barn. She had forgotten it in her coat pocket, but never thrown it away. Her breath caught, and then, without warning, tears spilled down her cheeks. They fell silently, soaking into her designer blouse, her perfect hair, her branded identity. She turned her chair away from the city and hugged the handkerchief to her chest. "I am a millionaire CEO," she whispered through the tears. "But I have never felt so empty." That night, she stayed in the office long after the lights in the building had dimmed. She did not answer emails. She ignored calls. She just sat in the stillness, feeling everything she had ignored for far too long. The next morning, her assistant entered, hesitating at the doorway. "Ma'am, You may want to see this." He handed her a newspaper. On the front page was a photograph. Familiar eyes, familiar flannel shirt. Thomas standing beside a county sheriff accepting an award. The headline read, "Wing Local Farmer, honored for bravery in blizzard rescue." Amelia stared at the image, heart-thudding. The article detailed how Thomas had provided emergency shelter during the storm and how his resourcefulness had potentially saved lives along that stretch of rural road. It mentioned how he lived quietly, asking for nothing in return. She traced the photo with her finger, eyes watering again. He had saved her body and soul, and she had walked away. She set the paper down and stood slowly, walking to the window. The skyline no longer looked powerful. It looked distant, artificial. She had built an empire. She had built a name. But it was not enough. Because in a barn, somewhere, beneath snow-covered hills, she had found something no title could ever give her: peace, warmth, love. And she had left it behind. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of the black rental car as it pulled up slowly to the edge of the wooden fence. The sky was painted in streaks of soft amber and lavender, and the last golden rays of the sun lit the field behind the barn like a fading memory. Amelia turned off the engine, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. She had been driving for hours. The handkerchief Thomas had once tucked gently into her hand, resting on the passenger seat beside her. It was just a simple piece of fabric, but she had carried it like it was something sacred, a reminder of something she thought she had lost forever. Her heart pounded. This was foolish, she thought, reckless, emotional. But then she looked out and saw him, and all the logic in the world fell silent. Thomas was near the fence, hammer in hand, securing a loose board. His posture was the same, strong, steady, but something in his expression. As he glanced up and saw her, changed in an instant. The hammer froze mid-air, his breath caught, their eyes locked across the field like magnets, reconnecting after being apart too long. Amelia stepped out of the car slowly. The wind tugged at her coat and her hair, but she barely noticed. Her heels crunched softly on the gravel as she walked toward him. She stopped just a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The last time they stood this close, she had walked away. Now, she had come back. Thomas broke the silence first, reaching slowly into the pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled out the handkerchief. Her handkerchief. It was slightly faded, but carefully folded like it had never left his possession. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, holding it out. Amelia's lips trembled. She took it with both hands as if receiving something more than cloth, something irreplaceable. "You kept it?" she asked, her voice soft. Thomas looked away briefly, then back at her. "I didn't mean to. You never could let go of it." "Of you." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the silence that followed. "I came back," she said finally. "I came back because I couldn't breathe in the city anymore. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit through one more board meeting, one more fundraiser, one more conversation about stock prices and market projections without thinking about this place, about you." Thomas's jaw tensed slightly, as if fighting back hope. "I told myself I left because I had to," she continued, "because my life was too complicated, too public. But the truth is, I was scared." He said nothing, letting her speak. "I've spent my entire life building walls to protect myself from pain, from failure, from needing anyone. But that night in your barn, when you looked at me like I mattered, not because of my name or my wealth, but just because I was human, I realized how tired I was of pretending." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "I don't want to pretend anymore. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. "I thought I was just a chapter in your story," he said, finally breaking his silence, a pause between boardrooms and interviews. "I thought you'd forget me the moment the snow melted." "I tried," Amelia whispered. "I really tried." Thomas's eyes were glassy now, his voice lower. "You walked out that morning and I stood behind the barn door like a fool, listening to the sound of your car fading down the road. And every day since, I've wondered if I should have asked you to stay." Her eyes welled with tears. "You didn't have to. I never really left. Not in here." She placed a hand gently over her heart. She stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until only inches remained. "I don't care. If the world thinks I've lost my mind, let them talk. Let them say I've thrown away my title, my company, my future. Because I don't want a future that doesn't include you." His breath shuddered. "You mean that?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't need a co in my life. I don't need another deal, another accolade. I need the man who made me tea at 2 in the morning, who watched over me when I was sick, who talked to horses when he couldn't sleep. I need the man from the barn." Thomas reached out and touched her cheek gently. "You're not lost anymore." She shook her head. "I'm home." And then, without another word, he pulled her into his arms. The wind picked up around them, swirling the scent of hay and pine and memories. But in that moment it was as if time stood still. They held each other as the last light of the day faded behind them, wrapped not just in warmth, but in something deeper, something real. And this time, neither of them let go. 1 year later, the old barn had a new roof. The garden bloomed with wildflowers, and laughter rang more often in the air. What once was just a quiet piece of farmland tucked away from the world had become a place of transformation. Amelia no longer wore tailored suits or walked across glass floors lined with shareholders. She had stepped away from her role as CEO, not in disgrace or defeat, but in quiet triumph. In its place, she had built something new, the Willow Path Center, a vocational program set on the edge of Thomas's land. It trained and employed formerly homeless individuals, offering not just skills, but dignity. It was the kind of legacy she had never dreamed of, but now could not imagine living without. Every morning she woke to the scent of fresh hay and coffee, and the soft murmur of Thomas's voice outside, talking to the animals as he worked. And every morning she felt something stronger than success: peace. The wedding was small, just like they wanted. It took place on a late summer afternoon in the middle of the wildflower field behind the barn. No golden chairs, no press, no glitz, only wooden benches, jars of daisies, and a soft breeze that made the grass sway like waves. Thomas stood tall in a simple linen shirt and suspenders, his hands trembling, only slightly as he waited. By his side, their youngest rescue horse, a gentle chestnut foal, stood adorned with a garland of soft green leaves and wild flowers. The horse was technically the ring-bearer, though it had tried to eat the ribbon more than once. When Amelia stepped into the field, the entire world seemed to hush. She wore a dress made by hand from natural silk, light and flowing, the kind that whispered with each step. Her hair was loosely braided, dotted with tiny daisies, picked that morning by the children she now taught. One of them was Lily, a small girl with curious eyes and a scarred past Amelia knew too well. Amelia had met her during a visit to a shelter, and without a second thought, she had taken her in. As Amelia approached Thomas, Lily suddenly stepped forward, clutching a small bouquet she had picked herself. Her voice trembled, but she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mama," she said, You're not a princess. A soft chuckle rippled through the guests, but Lily continued, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. You're the miracle I wished for when I didn't even know how to pray. You saved me. You make me feel safe. You make me feel loved. Amelia froze, her lips quivering, eyes wide with unshed tears. Lily took a step closer and whispered, I love you, Mama. Thank you for choosing me. Thomas reached out, his hand finding Amelia's, and the two of them stood there, tears streaming, holding on to each other, and the small voice that had just given them a gift greater than any fortune. The ceremony was brief, intimate, spoken in soft words and knowing glances. When they kissed, it was not with the fervor of fairy tales, but with the deep understanding of two people who had fought to heal, to rebuild, to trust. As the sun began to set, the fields turned to gold. The guests gathered under string lights and passed plates of food made with love, vegetables from the garden, bread from a neighbor, pies from the bakery downtown. Music played from a single speaker, and the children danced barefoot in the grass. Later that evening, as twilight settled and the stars began to appear, Amelia and Thomas stood at the edge of the field, arms wrapped around each other. You know, Amelia said, her cheek resting on his chest, we never did have a perfect story. Thomas smiled. Good. I never wanted perfect, I just wanted real. She looked up at him. Do you think we're enough? His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face. You and me, we're more than enough. We're everything. They stood in silence, watching Lily twirl beneath the fairy lights, her laughter lifting into the night like a blessing. Behind them, the barn glowed softly. Inside were blankets, books, the soft nuzzle of horses, everything Amelia once never thought she needed. And as the stars shimmered above, Amelia closed her eyes and whispered, I'm home. Not because she had built an empire, but because she had finally built a life. Sometimes it takes a wrong turn in a snowstorm to lead us exactly where we belong. Amelia and Thomas came from two different worlds, one of sky-high glass towers, the other of quiet soil and open skies. But when their paths crossed in the heart of winter, what began as survival became something deeper, something real. Their story is not one of perfection, but of truth, of healing, of two souls brave enough to choose simplicity over status and love over legacy. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the coldest storms can lead to the warmest places, then we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Emotive Tales for more true love, second chances, and tales that remind us what really matters. Like, comment, and share if you believe in the quiet power of kindness and the beauty of lives rebuilt from the inside out. Because here, every story is a journey home. Welcome to Emotive Tales.